Yo, what's up guys? Let's look at that defenses. Video of yesterday, link in the description down below is for the offenses. Today we're going to be looking at defenses. And often people are saying it's like, oh yeah, I would get a higher rank if I just had a better defense. Well, to a certain extent, defense is something you cannot really influence that much. Whereas offense, you can influence a lot. If you get 100% success rate on your offense, that's often more important than getting a good defense. But let's look at how you can make your defense better, because there's a whole bunch of things that you should be considering trying to counter right now. And the meta for defense is actually kind of difficult because of the Erishion plus a booster and then all of the old style of a Vanessa plus a Triton that used to be super meta. It's now kind of worse, but let's see how we can still counter most of the things, because at the top we see the things that we want to counter in typical sense. We want to be countering the Lamila Tricks team, which is arguably already one of the hardest things to counter, and everyone that has one has that team ruined up. You want to be countering typical Tiana teams, you want to be countering the Erishion team, you want to be countering Leo plus Alaya teams, you want to be countering Lucian, you want to be countering bombs, and you also want to be countering getting sniped by like Adriana plus a bunch of Sonias and series and that kind of good stuff. So definitely a lot of things that we want to counter. These are a little bit more niche for offenses, but we will be placing them in at some point as well. So what does a good AD need? Well, to be honest, a lot of good ADs are based on having a few LD5s in there, because that gives the more creativity and the more unseen, because those units are more rare, especially if you have certain pairs on that. But unpredictability. So if you see a defense, for example, let's say that we go for a super common defense with a Vanessa, and we go for a Triton, and then we go for, let's say, an old style of a... we had this for quite a while where we had a Ren plus a, let's say, Juno. This for a while was a pretty common defense as well, but it's also pretty predictable. This thing is probably Swift, this thing could be Swift, you're going to have a little bit of damage of that. This team will probably already kill that. That is just the main thing to it. So things that are not really seen are very predictable. Plus, you cannot really go anything very unpredictable on this, because people already kind of know these are most of the time on a triple shield set. You kind of know what kind of sets will be on. This could be a random high damage, but it's not really that unpredictable. But then again, how do you get for something unpredictable? Let's say that we go for a very weird team, which I used way back in the days of just a simple Shaina Martina and a Triana, and then you make the Shaina instead of a Vaio set on Swift. Sure, people have seen that already as well, because it's kind of old, but that gives a little bit more unpredictability. It's like, oh wait, I did not expect this unit to be Swift or that unit to be this pair. That's normally always Swift. Those kind of things do help you out. And something that cannot be cleared with a common offense, which most of the time I would mainly recommend on the first 3, maybe first 4, that you cannot be cleared by that. And I would highly recommend to re-rune before you rush. What are the 2 defense goals? The main goal is not being hit. Because let's say you have 50% win rate, but you're getting hit, let's say, 20 times per 10 minutes. That still means you have 10 losers per, which is way too many losers, which will mean you drop. However, if you get barely hit at all, it's way much more of a win than actually getting wins in there. So therefore, a stall defense often is pretty good towards the end. Therefore, I recommend to go more for a speedy defense at the start and more towards a tanky defense at the end, especially if you want to push towards like G3 or even Legend. If you are in like G1, G2, it matters a little bit less. But what you often see is in the early rush people are gonna like Feng Yang Leo and then just slow clear. So anything that is super squishy but might actually get some wins in, people will just slow clear with a bunch of Leos and stuff. Whereas towards the end, people are more using like the speed clears where we get Tianas in there, where we get Lucians in there. And then you should also go for switch. Then also the question, HP lead versus speed lead. Well, that is going to be a more difficult topic right now, because before I always said speed lead is by far best because Vanessa or a Samath is just simply way better. Currently, since there is a speed lead in the offense that is crazy good, it is hard to say that speed leads are actually really solid, because the likelihood of this over here plus that outspeeding this is very slim. And I also highly recommend put your best runes towards offense, not towards defense. If you're only using slow clears in your offense, you can put your best runes of speed towards your defense. That is true. But in general sense, I would recommend to focus the runes on offense because that's what you're using a lot more. And your defense, you're never exactly knowing what you're going to get hit by. You might be like super hard speed checking and then people just fuck you up with a Leo, right? Like those are kind of things that you cannot really predict for, but your offense, you can actually kind of predict what will you be hitting and how much speed or stats would you need for. So therefore this, not sure. And it kind of depends on what units you have and what you can work with. And we're going to look at a few free-to-play options first. Then we're going to go into normal net 5 options. And then we're going to go into the LDs. And in the end, yes, multiple LDs is probably what will be best on defense at the moment. But if we go full free-to-play, units that I kind of like, this or this for a lead, that is definitely an option out there. And then we probably want to just add in some annoying tanky units. So we're probably going to add in something like this or this. You could even add in this. And then probably something along the lines of this. This is probably as good as it gets, full free to play. There's not too many options out there. Of course, a Veromos in here would also be pretty nice. But that is pretty much as good as it gets, full free to play. This could still be an option, but yeah, as mentioned, it doesn't really get much better than that in full free-to-play. You're pretty much bound to whatever you can get. What are core defenses nowadays for normal net 5s? Well, actually, one that has been performing best for quite a while for a lot of people is this one in combination with the Odin and adding in the Amduet. Why is this team good? Well, this is actually covered by the Odin in there. This is covered by the Amduet in there. This is kind of covered by the Odin as well. However, the new offense, if this one is countering the Amduet with having enough will runes and shield runes, then this team will actually get heavily messed up. So that's the new one. Actually does mess it up a little bit more. But this is one of those offense of full non-LD5s that was performing pretty well in the past. I could still see it do decently well. But if it's actually going to be very good these days, I'm not sure. Same thing for this together with like a Veromos or a Juno plus whatever kind of pushbacker you could find over here, often paired over this. Was not a bad defense as well, but I think it's also kind of messed up by this team over here at the moment. Unless you maybe put a full Swift set to this that can actually hit in skill 3 and then start pushing things back like the Kabila or the Asher on the enemy team, and then it might actually mess things up. Which once again goes to a little bit of RNG and unpredictability because they don't expect this thing to be Swift. So therefore I think we're going to go more into a Leo defense style of territory. So what is a good Leo defense? Well, first of all, Leo defense, I think it is very important to understand that you can trap your Leo. And what means a trap on the Leo? Do not make Leo at a 0 speed, make Leo at 100 speed or 80 speed or whatever fits you for your rune quality, because most of the runes have some speed in there if you go for full tanky sets. Why is that? Well, often people say it's just like, oh, just put a Megan against it with a Lucian. But let's say this Lucian is at 0 speed, this thing is at a 100 speed, so 200 speed total, and this thing is, let's say, 130 speed total. That means that if this thing gets NAM triggered, this thing is a lot faster than that. This thing will go for the boost on the Lucian. Lucian will not move, your whole team won't move, because Leo drags everyone down to Leo speed, but everyone that's below Leo speed doesn't get pushed up to Leo speed. So therefore, it's once again a unpredictable, maybe, well, if you people have seen this video, but it's a little bit more creative and it's a little bit facing the common offense that you're just like, okay, this might counter me, so I'm going to be countering that itself by just having the trap on the Leo itself. If you want to counter the trap itself, you would have to make this thing at like 200 speed rather than the 130 speed, but then you might have the issue of not dealing enough damage. So that's kind of where you kind of trap that defense, where it might be something that doesn't completely work. However, most Leo teams are very susceptible to Lamelion. Because, for example, let's say that we go for common defense like this. People like to use even 2 of this. Lamela, it takes a while to get through the Camillas, but you absolutely shred this with the Lamelia team. So that's one of those things. How to counter that then? Because in the end, if we put a Amduet in there, Amduet also doesn't, like Lamelia teams, they don't really care about that neither. And this is kind of the moment already that you have to go either very creative of a team that I haven't seen yet myself and I cannot really think of myself as well, or you go in towards LD territory where it's like, let's say you add in this thing and then you don't really need that. But you add in this thing, Lamilla really struggles with clearing this thing. Sure, they will go through it, but it takes way too long, and therefore you're way too stall, and therefore people at the end of the rush will simply not hit you because it simply just takes too long. And therefore, I would also claim that he is probably one of the best defense units in game right now, because this is the most common offense unit in game at the moment, or at least the most common offense team at the moment. Sure, you can also try to counter that by a light pony, but doesn't even really do that. Seimei kind of does it, but there's an Amber next to it, which the Amber, it's kind of countering the Amber with the heal block is kind of countering the Seimei as well. Makes it pretty decent, but it is not the best. What I've been running for quite a while is actually the team over here with a light pony and then adding in a Tianlang. But in all honesty, if you have a good ruined Lamilla team, it still beats this. That's how strong the Lamilla team is, and therefore I would recommend everyone to use the Lamilla team if you have it, because it's just simply that powerful. However, there's certain ways that you could put the Leo on a Despair set and then have a bit more RNG to it, and rather than going for full Vio sets on these, you just go more tanky sets with enhanced runes or tolerance runes for more resistance on the whole team. There's definitely a few options out there where you can make it more difficult, but in the end, it will still be cleared. It is just a bit of a slow clear, and that's kind of one of those things as well. If it is too slow a clear for other people and they tried it once before and now they are like, yo, I got like 3 minutes left on the clock. That hit took me 2.5 minutes. I'm not going to hit you again. So that's already a W for you right there. Talking about really stally units, this guy. This guy is a crazy stall unit. Could be used in any kind of shape or way. If this thing is tanky enough, I've seen some people go for like too much speed on it or too much whatever stats on it to deal some damage. Get rid of all of that shit. Just make him as tanky as humanly possible, that he will always go cycling into that second phase where he doesn't get killed in the first rotation, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. He gets back with the life. His animations take until the dawn of fucking time. Like, these things take way too freaking long. And that's actually the fun fact. Using 2 of them is actually therefore also kind of a good stall mechanic. Like, if you want to just have like a stupid stall defense, legit go for something like this, or even a Leo in there with that, and you will have something annoying and that's stalling. Like, same thing if we don't have 2, we could, for example, add in this, make everything super tanky, that because you can clear this, but it will take a bit of time as well, especially if there's Vionem on this one and it starts like removing everything all the time. One of the options you could do against this is, for example, bombs, but then you're already looking at a more RNG of a setup yourself as well. So there's a lot of options out there that could work and could be annoying. So then let's talk about a few other units that could also be good in their own accord, and if I think they're good. We're just going to go from the left towards the right. So if you have any of your units in here, you might be like, oh, what kind of team would that be? We'll showcase it over there. So this is more free to play. This one I already talked about. Hellfest. Hellfest is not as common anymore, mainly because you have Amber in there, and Amber really messes up that you cannot heal. So I would say Hellfest currently as a defense unit, not that great. Maximilian was never really a defense unit, so I would not really recommend that. This is more free to play option. Pontus is decent if your Pontus is 100 res. I would definitely recommend Pontus always to be on Violent. Sure, Nem Will is kind of cool as well, but Pontus getting the Pontus RNG where he puts up the invisibility, if your enemy already used its strips, it's a guaranteed victory for you. So I would Pontus heavily go for an RNG Pontus if you're using Pontus in your defense. And then the question is, what do you pair next to the Pontus? Well, any kind of like semi-speed-ish contesting or annoying shit. So you could definitely go for still a defense that is looking something like this, and you're just heavily preying on the RNG to go right for you and wrong for the enemy. Sure, this is countered by like Tiana. Sure, this is countered by bombs. Maybe to counter the Tiana, you're gonna get this one in there or something. But that is definitely an option for Pontus to heavily add onto the RNG. Samath is mostly on Despair, but you could go for Rage Samath. Rage Samath is a team that could potentially RNG the living shit and kill like a Lucifer team because it just simply does too much damage. That's an option out there. Only thing you have to keep in mind that a Leo Lucifer offense will actually mess you up really badly. Maybe I should have placed Lucifer in here because Lucifer is a pretty common thing to get hit by as well. But if you can make this thing still with like a speedy comp, that's definitely an option out there where you could actually go for a decent comp. But you have to keep in mind, Leo teams tend to kind of mess this up pretty badly. Nefties as elite, I'm not a big fan because it's just too simple to outspeed. I tried it a few times myself, but the moment you go for this, legit everyone and their mom starts to outspeed you because you have just way too low of elite, not a big fan. More as elite is not that bad because the moment that people go in with a Nefties or even the Draken Warrior will trigger the more. And therefore, the more could potentially Despair. I would also highly recommend put Despair more if you're using more right now. And it's hard countering this style. It's not really countering the Tiana unless what you put next to it. It is kind of countering a Limilia team if you use the right stuff next to it. So more on the lead might actually be pretty interesting. A common thing that we have seen before is going for something about a Moor and a Jhin and an Amduet. If you put the three of them together, you are countering this to a certain extent. You're definitely countering this. You're also countering this. I would say you're also countering this, but there's one issue you're not really countering, and that's this. Aya really messes up these kind of teams because Aya is going to get so many debuffs that anything that is related to a Fire Jhin is messed up by an Aya, but not too many people have two Ayas just yet because a lot of people didn't think about saving a second one, same as me. But yeah, it's one of those things that you could keep in mind that this could be pretty nasty. And then I would say put any kind of form of damage dealer in here. I have seen people do the following, where they added in a Dark Demon, and Dark Demon was hopefully killing then the Aya, which was kind of the game plan. You could also put a team like this and then maybe add in like a Death Break unit on fire that could take out the Aya, but I haven't really found myself like a clear solution of like, hey, that unit could kind of fit for that. But if you're building something along the lines of these three, make your fourth slot an Aya killer. That's the main important thing that you can do on that team. And I think in general for non-LD comps, it's probably one of the better non-LD comps out there. Seiishizo for a defense, I don't think it's that great because most of the time everything just takes one turn, so it doesn't really add much. Megumi is an option. However, if they use the Ishirian and they don't use any kind of other wind units, this thing will always hit this after he already did his hit. So that's kind of useless for this thing in the first place. So therefore, I don't think Megumi is that good in defense at the moment. Akroma defenses, I think if you're going Akroma defense, you pretty much have to Leo next to it, and then you just put like stall/annoying units next to that, so you're probably gonna go for something along the lines of this or something. It is definitely clearable by a whole bunch of shits, but it is also not that much of a fast clear because let's say that they go for bombs, which in most cases is fast against these. Clearing this thing with a bomb team, they will always win, but it takes a little bit more time. Molong is not really a defense unit anymore. Carnal, I could definitely see Carnal still being used. It's not as great most of the time. It will be a Leo pair as well. Would definitely not go for a Carnal without a Leo. That's the thing. If you go HP lead, I would almost always say go for Leo. Otherwise, you just super Tiana food, and now you can kind of mitigate Tiana a little bit more by like something along these lines or whatnot. There are sure maybe a few that can kind of get away with it, but it's not as great. This thing, in my opinion, is, I would say, arguably the best defense unit in game, and that is simply because he counters this at a very hard extent. Sure, you could say it's like, oh, the combination of this and that together is better than the Nyx over here. Yes, probably. However, if you just want to use one LD5 or you only have one LD5, then this thing, once again, I would highly recommend it to put it next to a Leo. But these two together with a kind of a cleanser or some kind of healers or any kind of shape of way of annoying units in there, could be this, it could be so many things. That is actually a really strong team already because you just have so much damage reductions that your healers can at some point try to proc in, get the RNG in, and therefore, I would say Nyx, this one, is by far the best defense unit in game at the moment. Jessica, I've seen it a few times, probably also a Leo kind of comp, but most of the time still has issues with like pushbacks and those kind of things, plus doesn't add that much damage herself, so I don't think it's that great. Gelnir on defense, I think is pretty ass, would not really recommend that. Nigong on defense is actually pretty ass as well, whereas the Gandalf is a lot better because he activates on death the healing mechanic right away. There is one big way to counter him though, and that is by having the offense that would stun him. So if you have any kind of shape or way of stunning this dude, then it's really nice, but if your offense doesn't have that, he's definitely annoying. Or you just need a Grogan in there and then he kind of messes that up in the first place. But Nigong, in all honesty, I don't really like Nigong on defense because it is a little bit too straightforward. Like, sure, you could go for the two of those. Maybe you add this in there and maybe you have to counter like a Tiana with that or something. But then still, super food for this. Let's say that we remove you And then even, I would say still kind of food for this, to be honest. And still there's some ways to still Tiana this too. So I feel like that this has too many counters in the first place. Maybe it's an okay-ish kind of defense, but for IG3, I don't really like Nigong in there. Light Gandalf is a lot better for it. Abelio is also not as common on defense anymore, mainly because it's hard countered by Lamilla team, so I would kind of refrain from using a Abelio. Kinky is also not super common, also still counted by the Lamilla team over there. Area already placed in a few times, that unit's pretty good. Light Pony is pretty nice against a few things, but it's still hard counted by the Lamilla team. So that's just the big issue for a lot of teams out there. The moment that this thing is in human form, it loses half of its HP for pretty much no speed gain. So therefore this thing becomes kind of squish, and it doesn't really add too much to the table outside of maybe that random miss crit that can happen. But since a lot of teams are based on dealing damage otherwise than crits, this thing is not as great as I've seen as well. Burkild is actually usable on defense. I have seen people use this together with this together with this. And how does it exactly work? Well, your Leo moves, therefore Burkild gets A to B. If your Leo lands a debuff, Layla will move. If this thing lands a debuff, which can both happen on S1 or S2, Layla will move, which is kind of a toxic team. I have seen people do it like this. It is pretty decent. It's kind of annoying. A lot of people might skip it for that reason. Especially you can put a lot of damage to all of these units. There is one kind of issue, and that's Aya. Aya kind of messes up this team really badly. But outside of that, this team can be pretty annoying. And I could even see a world where you put a healer next to it, where the Aya doesn't become as annoying. And you still put pretty high damage on the 3 of those to actually take things out that your enemy might get screwed over. So I think that Burkild is actually pretty solid, but only with a Layla kind of style of defense. Vagina already mentioned him a few times. He's pretty solid on defense, mainly for the stall. I would say Byuncho, he is nice for the amount of damage he can output, but he's very straightforward. Like, you know exactly what he's gonna do. Just don't give him turns, kill him fast enough, and it's fine. Inosuke is actually a pretty nice unit, or used to be a nice unit if he had pretty good runes on it for a combination of a Triton, Vanessa, and Inosuke. Because he had the pushback, and he had the armor break, and he had the increased cooltime, and can do enough damage, especially because of the pushback where you can fuck up a Lamilla team. But he's gonna have hard issues against the Ishirian right now. So, but if you have a Triton fast enough, that's kind of a way you can put that on a defense still. Shaina Martina is still an option for defense, but it's more to mess up Leo's midweek rather than it's actually good. Hey Gang on defense, not a big fan. This thing on defense is really nice. It counts a whole bunch of stuff, but you have some Aya issues. So if you figure out the Aya issue while having this thing in your defense, he could be pretty nasty. However, he's also kind of hard counted by Galleon, because Galleon just simply doesn't touch him while doing its skills. Galleon, Tiana, neither of them do, so then he becomes kind of useless. He's only really good against like a Neftis, for example. Odin, as mentioned, in that one team with the Adriana, it's pretty nice, but outside of that, not that great. Nora, also kind of uncommon. These two, not even sure why I selected these two in there, in all honesty. Nyx on defense is kind of nice, but it's also a little bit overrated. Getting attack bar gain from, for example, your Galleon moving is kind of nice. But in most cases, if you just Tiana Galleon and you have, like, let's say a Zyros next to that, you kind of tend to mess up a Neftis. What I've seen a few people do is if you have Neftis, add in this thing, because then the provoke is 1 turn longer, which is definitely an annoying state. And then you can probably add in like a Leo and then some tanky healing unit or anything like that. Or I've also seen it where people go Vanessa and then a Swift Nyx. So Nyx definitely has some good pairs as well. But it's definitely not as strong as the other Nyx, because this thing just adds so much more value for not being messed up. Whereas Nyx, the issue what he mostly does is he resets something, but then the enemy, let's say that we go for the team that we just mentioned, this thing over here and then this thing over there. You can still do this. Maybe you don't get your skills up in the first rotation. You put the Veramos next to it for your cleanses. And then, yeah, you start doing your turns from turn 2 and then you've pretty much mess him up over there. I haven't seen this thing in defense all too much, but he's a little bit too low base for actually being that interesting. So not a big fan of this thing. Giselle is pretty nice because if the enemy doesn't have any strips left over, she could do a lot of damage. It was common to have like a team, something along the lines of this. However, this is messed up by a good Lamilla team, so therefore it's not as great. But what you could do is put this over there and then put this on high damage as well. And then on a death break, you might actually mess up the Lamilla team, which is definitely not a bad team. But once again, will have issues against the Erishan. So there are a few things that you can still kind of work around if you're fast enough. Alexander on defense is not that bad, but you have to be careful of the Lamilia team. So if you can counter the Lamilia team with the other units next to it, it is fine. If you can't, it's kind of bad. So as mentioned, if we go for defense that would be looking something like this, then that definitely does mess this up. It can also potentially mess this dude up. So then the Alexandra team becomes pretty interesting, but you need like a value to be able to mess up the Lamilia team. This thing I would recommend to just not use it. It's an Alexandra version, but way worse. It's not great. Juno is pretty decent. It's trying to counter the Lamilia team, but since you don't cleanse the others and you still got the heal block from the Amber, you kind of get messed up. On defense, can kind of trap things here or there, but it's mainly if people use a Tiana and then you outspeed the Tiana, you reset the Tiana and you're full on will. It's kind of nice, but outside of that, not that great. This thing on defense is kind of a free-to-play option that if you don't have any other units, you could kind of go for like a weird-ass free-to-play defense that could kind of mess things up, but is it that great? Not really. Loran defense is still pretty decent because in the end it is faster than this, so you have options out there. Issue is that you have to pair something that is also fast enough right next to that. Funny enough, I forgot to add the strongest Oblivion units in game, which do really mess up this team, which would be either you or you. You have to keep in mind that you have to make them on Swift and you have to make them speed increasing artifacts, otherwise you're not pairing up to your Laura. But then this is a super, super strong team. And you can even add like one more damage dealer or even like a semi-sustained unit after that. It's going to be an absolutely powerhouse of a team, which is super hard to outspeed. Leo's plus Lucifers you can counter by being triple shield on this. However, there's one particular counter against this team, which could be nasty, which is Tiana on a very low HP, will plus double Nemesis, or even one Nemesis is fine. And then they put a Leo next to that plus like a Galleon plus a Nuker. And what it happens is this thing will trigger the S2 or S3 most of the time. You will trigger the Nemesis on this, and therefore your heal or like this whole team will move because the Tiana just moved. A way to counter that is using an Amduet or using a Tianlang. But as you can see over here, this is also arguably still the strongest defense in game, in my opinion. But also very fucking premium. Wait, I was wrong. I forgot about one unit. This is the strongest defense in game at the moment. But then again, having all four of those, I got a lot of LDs. I have 1 out of 4. Yeah, the replace factors are kind of in there with you and the you. So there are a few replace factors in there. But if you have a Laura, Laura's actually at best strength when you have a Tian. When you have a Tianlang next to it so you don't get messed up by the Tianas. And sure, Amduet can kind of do it, but it's not as good at it. But still, Laura on defense is pretty darn solid. Because let's say that you don't have these, you could also still go for a Zhongshan Lao, or you go for the Inosuke, or you can go for a lot of different styles with this. Ragdoll defense is pretty uncommon. I've seen some weird defenses out there, but in most cases it just gets messed up by like this and this, so it's not that great. I have seen some people go for Teshan defense, mainly what Guts the Berserk likes to do. And that's one of those things, it's unseen and creative. Is it necessarily good? No, not at all. But it is unseen and creative, and therefore people might not have the exact offense rune to actually counter. Celia is now a little bit strong as well with more pushback on the sleeps, but has a little bit too low of base stats to actually be fully on my liking. Tianlang is always often good, but keep in mind Tianlang is not really killing anyone. So therefore a despair set on the Tianlang or a trap on Swift. If people try to outspeed that, for example, if they have a Swift version of this and then the next unit that moves right after is Swift as well and you're despair, you're still gonna get outsped. You put Swift to this, you might actually mess up an attack bar or a stun here and there. Ezio also haven't seen that on defense. Seimei is pretty decent against this if they miss their heal blocks. But only if they miss their heal blocks, it's kind of nice. Otherwise, Seimei is not really adding anything and then not really doing too much. Plus, of course, you are susceptible to like Lucians and bombs and insta being nuked. So you have to have a team around that kind of protect from that happening. And that's why this thing is just simply a lot better for the stall teams. Ren, we kind of already talked about. Chilling. Chilling is a pretty interesting unit as well, because technically is the fastest unit in game while being on Swift and Will, plus some other unit being on Shield. He will be a plus 40 extra speed, which is way faster than this plus a Capilla. But the big issue is that, let's say you go for these two together, the unit that moves right after has to be a strip. You could potentially say it's like, oh, let's actually use him in offense and defense together, which is an option. Then you have 2 units that can derp, and both of the units should not derp to actually get your team in. Plus you need crazy speeds to make this thing move at his speed. Plus the units coming after that then also have to be at a crazy speed. So then you're already looking at units that preferably are higher on the base speed. Plus they have to mess up and counter all of the other things. But it is potentially a very strong team and very speed focused. But then you get the issue, you just get Leo plus Lucifer, then you still get messed up. So it is strong, but it definitely has its counters as well. But I could see a world that, let's say we go premium LDs, something along the lines of this, or maybe this instead of that, could potentially do pretty annoying things. But as mentioned, runing up this is very difficult on the rune quality, because the amount of speed that everything needs to be on the chilling speed is hard. But then again, with the good rune quality, it might actually be pretty strong. So that's pretty much most of the defense things out there. So I cannot really give you an exact team of saying it's like, hey, use A, B, C, and D, rune it up exactly like this, because that really kills the unseen and creativity and unpredictability kind of style. Because if I say, these 4 units are the best defense in game, and everyone has those units, everyone's going to be running those units, and next week we have a great counter against that. Because in the end, nearly everything is beatable. There are a few things that are harder to beat than other things, such as the team that I showcased earlier, this team out there that I was arguing for being the best defense in game. But if everyone had these units out there, then everyone would start to run this plus this, because these two do outspeed this in the end. Plus you don't trigger the Tina Lang on this case. You can strip everything and then you just mess them up on the last 2 targets. So in the end, everything is counterable. It is just kind of by the question, how common is that defense? Because in this case, it is going to be very uncommon as a defense, where it's not that interesting for everyone to run this as an off. So the best thing you can take away from this video is try to counter the Lamilia team, try to counter the Tiana team, try your best to counter a Leo Lucifer team, and try to counter the Erishan team. If you counter all of those 5, and then maybe also a Lucian / a Bomber team out there, if you counter most of that, you will probably have a very good defense. Plus, I highly recommend to go for an annoying switch towards the end, especially if you're hit a lot by the same person over and over. Simply just go for a different defense that he potentially cannot hit. And if he's taken too long, he might leave you, and then you get your defense goal of simply not being hit, and that's the main thing that you should be aiming for. That's all for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. See you as always in the next one. And guys, traps. Always go for traps, especially on your stall. Because if you trap people in your stall, they won't be happy and they won't be hitting you again. See you later. And good luck on your rush tonight if you're watching it on the Sunday.
Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more guides, join the Discord and check out the content tab for the guide video archive, which contains all of the guides that you might need. Hope to see you there.